It was a cold Tuesday afternoon in the middle of the city, and people were moving fast, heads down, earbuds in, focused on their own worlds. Cars honked at intersections, taxis flew past red lights, and steam rose from the grates in the sidewalks, as if the earth itself was sighing beneath the weight of it all. Amidst the bustle and indifference of the concrete jungle, a man sat hunched on the corner of 8th and Morrison. He looked weathered, not just by the elements, but by life itself. His clothes were tattered, barely holding together, his hands grimy and shaking slightly as he held out a crumpled paper cup with 2 coins rattling at the bottom. "Spare change? Anything helps," he mumbled, his voice barely louder than the wind whipping between the buildings. But no one stopped. Some glanced briefly. Some crossed to the other side of the street entirely, while others didn't even seem to notice he was there. A woman in a business suit clutched her purse a little tighter as she passed. A teenager with headphones didn't even glance in his direction. And a man in a rush to catch the next train nearly tripped over him, muttering under his breath without an ounce of apology. The man remained still, his shoulders slumped not just from the weight of his backpack, but from the weight of repeated rejection. He didn't expect much anymore. Just $1, maybe, for a loaf of bread. That's all he wanted. That's all he hoped for. He had been there since morning, and the city had offered him nothing but cold stares and moving feet. But then came a pause in the rhythm of the crowd, a break in the pattern. A tall man, dressed in dark jeans and a clean black hoodie, slowed as he approached. His skin was dark, his eyes warm but observant. He wasn't moving like the rest. He wasn't trying to avoid the man on the ground. In fact, he seemed like he was looking for him specifically. The homeless man noticed the hesitation and instinctively looked down, ashamed, thinking the man was going to ask him to move or tell him he was making the sidewalk look bad. But instead, the stranger knelt down slightly, not enough to seem patronizing, just enough to speak at eye level. "Hey, brother," he said, his voice soft but confident. "You all right?" The question hit harder than it should have. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loaded with pity. It was genuine. For a second, the homeless man didn't answer. He looked up, unsure, his eyes narrowing as if trying to detect the trick, the judgment, the string attached. But there was none. He began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and started again. "I'm just trying to get $1 for some bread, that's all. Ain't looking for nothing more." The man in the hoodie nodded slowly. "You hungry?" he asked. The homeless man blinked, surprised by the bluntness, but then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Been a couple days since I ate anything real." The stranger stood back up, looked around briefly at the crowd still ignoring them, and then turned back. "My name's Robert," he said, holding out his hand. The homeless man stared at it for a moment before hesitantly shaking it. His grip was weak. "James," he replied. Robert smiled. "Well, James," he said, "how about we do a little better than a loaf of bread?" James frowned slightly, unsure what that meant. "What you mean?" "I mean," Robert said, glancing at the store down the block, "there's a grocery store a couple streets down. Come with me. Let's get you some food. Something proper." James sat frozen, processing the offer, caught between disbelief and a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. "You serious?" he asked, his voice low, almost scared. "Dead serious," Robert said, already turning slightly, expecting James to follow. James hesitated, looking down at his belongings. Just a small torn backpack and a sleeping bag barely rolled up beside him. He grabbed them quickly and stood, a little shaky on his feet. As they started walking, the crowd continued to move past them, uninterested, unaware that something very small, but very real, was happening. A stranger had stopped. A stranger had seen him. And now, maybe, things were about to change. James couldn't help but glance over at Robert every few seconds as they walked, his steps a little unsteady, not just because of exhaustion or hunger, but because his mind was spinning with confusion and disbelief. For the longest time, he had felt invisible. People passed him like he was a stain on the city, a blur in their peripherals, a problem they didn't want to think about. But now someone not only stopped, he spoke, he listened, and he cared. That alone felt surreal. James clutched his backpack to his chest like a shield, like if he let go something might happen, like the moment could vanish as fast as it appeared. His eyes were sunken but glimmering now, a strange mixture of skepticism and hope dancing within them. Robert walked beside him, not saying much, just calmly leading the way, hands in his pockets, the kind of calm that didn't need to fill silence with noise. When they stopped at the crosswalk, James finally broke the quiet. "You know," he said, almost nervously, "I was just hoping for $1. Just one. Enough for a loaf of bread from that gas station a block down. That's all I really needed. I ain't trying to take advantage of nobody." Robert looked at him and nodded. "I get it, but let's not just do the bare minimum. Let's get you more than that, man. You deserve more than just surviving. You deserve to eat real food, get warm, feel human again." James looked down at the sidewalk, his throat tightening. "People don't usually talk to me like that," he muttered. "Most just look the other way. Some even tell me to move, or call me names, like I'm garbage or something." "You're not garbage," Robert said firmly, not needing to raise his voice to make it clear. "You're a man. You've got a name. You've got a story. Whatever brought you here doesn't mean you're stuck here forever." The walk wasn't long, but for James, it felt like walking into another world. The closer they got to the grocery store, the more nervous he became. He hadn't been inside a real market in months. He was afraid of the way people might look at him, the way employees might follow him down the aisles thinking he'd steal something, the way kids might whisper to their parents about the smell. But when they stepped through the sliding doors, Robert walked in first, confident and calm, and James stayed close behind him like a shadow, trying to stay hidden. The bright lights made his eyes squint, and the warmth of the indoor air immediately began to thaw the stiffness in his fingers. Robert grabbed a cart and nudged it toward James. "Go ahead," he said. "What do you like? Let's get what you need and what you want, all right." James hesitated, his hands hovering near the handle like he wasn't allowed to touch it. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't wanna—" "Yes," Robert cut in gently. "I'm sure. You're not asking for too much. You're asking for the basics. We all need help sometimes." So James slowly began moving down the first aisle, eyes darting to the shelves like he was trying to remember what normal life used to feel like. He grabbed a loaf of bread first, almost instinctively, the kind he used to buy when things were normal. Then some peanut butter, a couple of cans of soup, a pack of rice. He kept looking back at Robert, almost apologizing with every item. But Robert just kept nodding, encouraging him. "Get more," he said. "Don't think small. Think about tomorrow too, and the next day." They filled the cart slowly, James growing more comfortable with each aisle. He picked out some apples, a pack of eggs, a box of cereal, even a few instant meals. When they reached the checkout, James looked at the cart like it wasn't really his, like it might disappear if he blinked too hard. "This is more than I've had in. Hell, I don't even know how long," he said, his voice barely audible. "Thank you, man. For real. I didn't think anybody would ever do something like this for me." Robert just smiled, pulling out his wallet. "Everyone deserves to eat. Everyone deserves kindness. It's really that simple." As the cashier rang everything up, James stared at the conveyor belt, watching each item slide forward like a parade of second chances. When the bags were packed and the cart was full again, but this time with hope instead of just survival, Robert glanced at James and said, "Let's go one more place. I know a spot where we can get you a new jacket. Maybe some better shoes too." James blinked, his face a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Man, I don't even know what to say. I was just sitting on that corner thinking the day was gonna end like all the others. Cold, hungry, alone. And now this. I feel like I'm dreaming." "You're not," Robert said. "You're just finally getting a break. Let's keep it going." And with that, they pushed the cart out of the store together, stepping back into the world that hadn't changed at all. But suddenly for James, it didn't feel as cruel as it did that morning. Something had shifted, something real. And for the first time in a long time, he was walking beside someone instead of being walked past. With the grocery bags filling the cart and the chill of the afternoon fading beneath the comfort of full arms and fuller hearts, James walked alongside Robert in a stunned silence that carried more emotion than words ever could. The bags were heavy, but it was the good kind of heavy, the kind that reminded him of times long gone, of shopping trips when he had a home, a place to go back to, a kitchen to store things in. Though he still didn't have that, not yet, he now had more food than he'd seen in months, and it wasn't just cans and scraps. It was real nourishment. Fruits, bread, warm meals ready to heat, bottled water, even a chocolate bar or two Robert insisted on adding, just because. As they reached a quieter side street, Robert paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "You don't need to settle for just surviving. You deserve warmth too. Let's hit this thrift shop. I know they've got good stuff. Coats, boots, even gloves. You shouldn't be out here in that thin jacket." James hesitated, his fingers tightening on the cart handle. "Man, you've done more than enough already. I can't let you spend more on me. You don't owe me nothing." Robert tilted his head and smiled softly. "It's not about owing. It's about doing what's right. Come on, let me help you get set up for real. Food's just part of it. You need to stay warm, stay healthy. Clothes make a difference." James finally nodded, his voice cracking as he said, "Okay, thank you." Inside the thrift store, James moved slowly at first, like someone walking through a memory. The smell of old denim and warm cotton filled the air, and the quiet hum of hangers sliding across racks made the space feel almost sacred. Robert helped him pick out a heavy coat lined with fleece, a new pair of jeans without holes, socks, sturdy boots, and a beanie that covered his ears completely. James stared at himself in the mirror when he tried the coat on, almost not recognizing the man looking back at him. The image staring at him wasn't just someone who looked warmer, but someone who looked seen. After the purchase, they walked back to the street, bags stacked, air colder now, but somehow less biting with the new coat wrapped around him. "This is too much," James whispered. "No, it's just enough," Robert replied. Over the next few days, the two kept in touch. Robert didn't just disappear like most people who made one-time gestures and never returned. He met James for coffee nearly every morning, always insisting on paying, always asking real questions: how James slept, what he needed next, how he was feeling. At first, James struggled to answer. He wasn't used to talking about feelings or plans anymore, but Robert made space for that. He listened without judgment. In time, James opened up about his past, how he'd once had a job in construction, how an injury and bad luck had left him out of work, how pride and shame made it hard to ask for help until it was too late. Robert didn't pity him. He just nodded and said, "You've been through it, but you're still here. That counts for something." One morning, as they sat in a corner booth of the little diner Robert liked, sipping cheap coffee that tasted like warmth itself. Robert said, "I know a guy who runs a warehouse over on 14th. He's always looking for hands, nothing too heavy, but steady hours, honest work. You interested?" James nearly dropped his mug. "Me? I mean, I ain't worked in years. I don't even know if I could keep up." "You can," Robert said with quiet certainty. "You've survived more than most. A job? That's just the next step." So James said yes. The next day, Robert walked with him to the warehouse, introduced him to the manager, and helped him fill out the paperwork. With the ID Robert helped him recover and a clean set of clothes, James didn't look like someone to ignore anymore. He looked like someone ready to rebuild. The manager gave him a shot. The first shift was hard, but James showed up. Then he showed up again, and again. Weeks passed. Paychecks came in. James started saving. He found a small room in a shared housing program. He stopped panhandling. His face, once gaunt and wary, now had color and confidence. Robert still met him for coffee, but now James insisted on paying sometimes. "You helped me," he'd say. "Let me return the favor, even just a little." And Robert would smile and let him. Their conversations changed too. Less about survival, more about life, about memories, about what was next. One day, as they sat across from each other, with steam rising between their mugs, James leaned back and said, "You didn't have to stop that day. You could have walked past like everybody else." Robert just shrugged. "But I didn't." James looked out the window for a moment, then back at him. "You changed my life, man. You gave me the first break I've had in years." Robert shook his head. "You did the work. I just saw someone who needed a hand." James nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I'll never forget it." And he didn't, because one moment of kindness had turned into something bigger, a friendship, a second chance, a future.